I'm not sure which moment haunts me more. The first time I realized my daughter was lying to me, or the sound of her crying through the bathroom door while I tried to piece together the truth. But I suppose I should start before the lies and the tears, before the will and the secrets, back when I still believed I knew my own family. It was the morning after my husband's funeral. Rain hammered the windows, and the house felt impossibly empty, every room echoing with the memory of his footsteps, the scent of his aftershave still lingering in the hall. I remember pressing my hand to the stair rail, still expecting to feel the warmth of his palm, the trace of his steady, predictable presence. Instead, only cold wood met my skin, and my daughter, Sarah, stood at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes rimmed red, clutching a mug she didn't drink from. "Mom, you should rest," she said softly, but I couldn't. There's a kind of madness that comes with grief, a compulsion to busy your hands, to sort and fold and organize what's left, as if order could make sense of loss. So I wandered from room to room, opening drawers, sifting through mail, pausing at the old bookshelf in our bedroom where David kept his favorite novels. That's when I noticed the bulging spine of a battered Hemingway, pages askew, as if it had been thumbed through in a hurry. I pulled it down, and a white envelope tumbled out onto the carpet. David's handwriting on the front. My name. For a moment, my heart stuttered. I held it to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of paper and ink, imagining him sitting at his desk, alive, thinking of me. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it. "You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory." Inside, folded neatly, was a letter, and beneath that, a document that made my breath catch. The first line read, "Last Will and Testament of David William Porter." I read the letter first. It was brief, almost businesslike, but with a tenderness in the closing lines. He apologized for not being able to say goodbye properly, and urged me to trust Sarah, to let her help, to remember the house would always be ours. My eyes stung. Then I turned to the will, hands trembling, and scanned the typed paragraphs, then stopped, reading again, slower. All assets to be split equally between my wife, Elaine, and my daughter, Sarah. No surprises there. But the signature at the bottom? It looked off. Too sharp, the curve wrong. David's signature had always been a bit messy, the D and the W running together, a flourish at the end. This one was neat, precise. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse a thin wire inside my chest. Sarah came in, wiping her nose. "You found something?" She saw the envelope and froze. "What's that?" "It's from your father," I said. "His will. But Sarah, this signature, doesn't it look strange to you?" She grabbed the papers and too quickly stuffed them back into the book. "Mom, please, you're tired. It's just the stress. Dad wrote it, you know how he was about paperwork." Her voice trembled, but I let it go. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe everything would be straightforward, that we'd grieve, sort through his things, honor his memory, and somehow build a new life. I didn't want to see the fear flickering in her eyes. Later that afternoon, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, voice low. "No, I found it. She saw it. No, I'll handle it, I promise." When I walked in, she jumped, cheeks flushed, and hung up quickly. "Just Aunt Carol," she mumbled. I told myself not to push. Sarah had always been high-strung, a worrier. She'd been so close to her father, closer perhaps than to me. I poured myself tea and tried to focus on the ordinary. Bills, condolence cards, casseroles from neighbors. But the next day, when the lawyer called to set up the estate meeting, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. At the lawyer's office, everything smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The lawyer, Mr. Hensley, smiled gently, but his eyes darted to Sarah, then to me, as he unfolded the official copy of the will. He read it aloud, and my hand went cold. The signature was the same. I wanted to ask about it, to press the question, but Sarah squeezed my arm so tightly my fingers went numb. "Everything's in order," Hensley said. "You and your daughter are co-beneficiaries. We'll need both signatures for the accounts." That night, Sarah barely spoke. I heard her in her room, pacing, the floorboards creaking above my head. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past week, searching for something I'd missed. 2 days later, I tried to log into our joint bank account, only to find the password had been changed. I called the bank, waited through a maze of hold music, and when the representative finally answered, she said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Porter. It looks like your daughter Sarah has already visited. She's listed as primary contact now." My blood ran cold. I called up the stairs. "Sarah, did you change something with the bank?" She appeared at the landing, hair disheveled, eyes wild. "It was just easier, Mom. The lawyer said we should consolidate things. I'm trying to help." I nodded, but inside, the doubt festered. I checked the rest of our accounts, insurance papers, everything I could find. Little by little, things were shifting. Sarah's name first, my access restricted. At dinner, I asked her, "Why are you doing this without telling me?" She pushed her food around her plate. "You're not yourself, Mom. You need rest. I'm just making sure everything's okay." She sounded so reasonable, so caring. I almost believed her. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the creaks of the house, the soft click of her door opening and closing. In the morning, I found her shredding papers in the garage. When I asked what she was doing, she snapped, "Cleaning up. Dad would want us to move on." I reached for the trash bag, pulling out a torn scrap. I could just make out the words, "policy number," and my husband's name. "Sarah?" I whispered. "What are you hiding?" She burst into tears, collapsing onto the concrete, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" But she wouldn't say more. Days blurred together. Neighbors dropped off food, friends called, but I barely heard them. I searched through the house while Sarah slept, looking for anything, any clue, any explanation. In the back of David's closet, behind a row of winter coats, I found a locked box. I remembered the key. He kept it taped under the drawer of his desk, a secret he thought was clever. My hands shook as I opened the box. Inside were old passports, a pocket knife, and another envelope. This one was addressed simply, "For Elaine, if anything happens." I tore it open, heart pounding. "Elaine, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. If anything's gone wrong, you must be careful. Trust no one with the accounts unless you hear it from me directly. The lawyer knows. Remember? Hemingway." That was it. No signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably David's. Sloppy, rushed, but real. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. The will in the Hemingway book, the password changes, Sarah's frantic behavior. I pressed the note to my lips, fighting tears. That night, I slipped into Sarah's room and sat on the edge of her bed. She pretended to be asleep, but I could see her eyes glistening in the dark. "I found Dad's note," I whispered. "I know something's not right." She turned away, shoulders shaking. I said, "Sarah, please, tell me the truth." She didn't answer, but I stayed with her, stroking her hair, hoping she'd finally let me in. In the days that followed, I carried David's note in my pocket, a talisman against the confusion swirling around me. I watched Sarah more closely, the way she flinched when the phone rang, the way she jumped at shadows. I started to wonder if someone was pressuring her, if she was as much a victim as I was, or if she was hiding something darker, something I couldn't bear to imagine. The morning sun forced its way through the curtains, painting stripes on the bedspread. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's handwriting, that warning. "Trust no one with the accounts unless you hear it from me directly." The words pulsed behind my eyelids, a silent drumbeat of dread. Sarah was already up. I could hear her in the kitchen, running water, banging drawers with more force than necessary. I tried to steady myself, splashing cold water on my face, telling my reflection in the mirror that I could handle this, whatever this was. I had to believe I still knew my own daughter, that there was some explanation, even if I couldn't see it yet. When I came downstairs, she was on the phone again, her back to me. "No, she doesn't know." She stopped abruptly when she heard my footsteps. The way she spun around, eyes darting, made my heart squeeze. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. She hesitated. "Just the bank again. They keep asking for more paperwork." It was a lie. I could hear it in the way her voice wobbled, see it in how her hands gripped the edge of the counter. I poured myself coffee, acting like I believed her, but inside, I was unraveling. I needed to get out of the house, breathe air that hadn't been soaked in secrets. I told her I was going to the store for groceries. As I stepped outside, the weight of the past weeks pressed down on me. The neighbors' cars lined the street, a reminder of the casseroles and sympathy cards, the pitying looks. I kept my head down, clutching my bag, the note from David folded deep inside. At the store, I found myself wandering the aisles aimlessly, putting things in my cart without thinking. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Porter, this is Mr. Hensley's office. There's a matter with the estate I'd like to discuss, if you could come in today." Something in his tone made me nervous, but I agreed. I told myself maybe this was the break I needed, the moment when confusion would give way to clarity. Back home, I found Sarah cleaning the living room, almost frantically. She barely looked at me. I said, "I have to go out again. Lawyer's office." She dropped the duster, her face blanching. "Why? I thought everything was settled." I shrugged, trying to look casual. "He just said there was something with the paperwork." She didn't argue, but as I left, I saw her watching me through the front window, worry twisting her features. Mr. Hensley's office felt colder than before. He motioned for me to sit, closing the door quietly behind me. He shuffled papers on his desk, then looked up. "Mrs. Porter, I received a call from your daughter. She asked to expedite the transfer of certain assets, but there's something that doesn't sit right with me." I tried to steady my voice. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then pushed the will across the desk toward me. "I was reviewing the signature. It doesn't quite match the others on file. I know this is a difficult time, but is there any reason you know of that your husband might have changed his signature?" My heart hammered in my chest. I shook my head. "No, David always signed the same way. He was almost superstitious about it." He leaned back, considering me. "I'd like to bring in an independent expert, just to be sure. If there's any irregularity, it's best to clear it up now." I nodded, grateful and terrified all at once. "Thank you." When I left the office, my knees nearly buckled. The sky had clouded over, the wind sharp. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my bag, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something vast and dark. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the park, the one where David and I used to walk in the evenings. I sat on a bench, watching ducks skitter across the pond. My mind replayed every conversation, every look between Sarah and me, searching for signs I'd missed. Was it possible? Could my daughter, my own flesh and blood, have forged her father's will? The thought made me feel sick, but something inside me, a mother's instinct honed over years, whispered that I wasn't wrong. Back at the house, Sarah was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. "Did you tell Mr. Hensley you didn't trust me?" Her voice was sharp, brittle. I shook my head. "No, he just wanted to check something. Standard procedure," he said. She didn't look convinced. "You don't believe me, do you?" I wanted to say yes, to reach for her the way I did when she was little, to brush the hair from her eyes and promise her everything would be all right. But I couldn't. Not anymore. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about the years we'd spent together, the secrets we shared. I remembered the time she came home in tears after failing a math test, the way she curled up in my lap, trusting me to make it better. I wondered where that trust had gone, how it had curdled into this. In the morning, I called my sister, hoping for some clarity. Carol listened in silence as I stumbled through the story, my voice cracking. "Elle, you have to protect yourself," she said finally. "I know it's hard, but something's not right. Maybe Sarah's scared. Maybe someone's pushing her. But you need to be careful." Her words echoed David's note, and for the first time, I realized how alone I truly was. Days passed in a haze. I avoided Sarah as much as I could, moving through the house like a ghost. She became more withdrawn, barely speaking except to ask about bills or the mail. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the floor of David's office, surrounded by papers, her face streaked with tears. I sat beside her, silent. She shoved a stack of folders into a box, not meeting my eyes. "Sarah," I said quietly, "whatever's going on, I want to help. But you have to let me in." She shook her head, lips pressed tight. Later that week, I received a call from the handwriting expert Mr. Hensley had recommended. He wanted to see any other documents I had with David's signature. I gathered old tax forms, birthday cards, even the lease to our house, and brought them in. As he compared them, his brow furrowed. "This signature on the will, it's similar, but there are discrepancies. The slant, the pressure. It's almost as if someone tried very hard to imitate it, but didn't quite get it right." My hands trembled in my lap. "What happens now?" He looked at me, gentle but firm. "If it's forged, the will could be contested. You need to be careful who you trust." That night, I confronted Sarah again. I showed her David's note, laid out the evidence. She burst into tears, sobbing that she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she just wanted to protect me. "From what, Sarah?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What are you so afraid of?" She shook her head, silent. But as she looked at me, I saw a glimmer of the little girl she'd once been, lost, desperate for reassurance. The next morning, I found her gone. Her room was empty, the bed neatly made, her suitcase missing. On the kitchen table, she left a note. "I'm sorry, Mom. I need time to think. Don't call." My heart shattered all over again. I called Carol, voice shaking, and she came over immediately. We sat in the living room, the afternoon sun slanting across the carpet, and she held my hand as I cried. "What do I do now?" I whispered. She squeezed my fingers. "You fight, Elle, for yourself, for David, for Sarah. You find out the truth." I nodded, wiping my tears, feeling a flicker of resolve deep inside. I would not let grief or fear define the rest of my life. I owed it to David, and I owed it to myself. The following week was a blur of meetings, lawyers, bankers, the handwriting expert again. Each new piece of information felt like a blow, yet also, strangely, like a lifeline. I learned that Sarah had tried to access a separate account David had opened years ago, one I'd forgotten about. The banker, a thin man with sharp glasses, asked for identification. When Sarah couldn't provide it, he refused her. He called me later. "Mrs. Porter, your daughter was here. She seemed upset." I thanked him, my mind spinning. Why was she so desperate? What was she looking for? One evening, as I sorted through old photo albums, I found a card David had given me on our 20th anniversary. Inside, in his familiar scrawl, he'd written, "For Elaine, my heart, my home, my everything. Always, D." I traced the signature with my finger, tears pricking my eyes. I'd lost him, but maybe, just maybe, I could hold on to what was left of our life together. If I could find the truth. Sarah returned 3 days later, her face pale, eyes swollen from crying. She stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, looking like a stranger. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I was scared. I thought if I could just fix everything, you wouldn't hate me." I crossed the room and hugged her fiercely, feeling her tremble in my arms. "I could never hate you," I said. "But you have to tell me the truth. All of it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. We sat at the kitchen table, the remains of our dinner untouched between us. She told me everything: how she'd panicked after David died, how she'd found an old draft of his will on his computer, and desperate for control, forged his signature, thinking she was protecting me from financial ruin. But when things started to unravel, she became trapped in her own lie, unable to see a way out. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I never meant to hurt you." I held her hand, my own tears silent. I was angry, yes, furious even, but beneath the anger was a deep, aching love. She was still my daughter, still the little girl who once trusted me with all her secrets. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but neither would I let bitterness win. The road ahead would be hard, but I was determined to walk it, one step at a time. For David, for Sarah, for me. The days after Sarah's confession passed like walking through heavy fog. Some moments, I felt a strange numbness, as if my mind was protecting me from the shock of it all. Other moments, anger flared so suddenly it left me dizzy. I'd be washing dishes or folding laundry, and suddenly remember the sound of her voice. "I just wanted to protect you." And my hands would tremble, soap slipping through my fingers, plates clattering in the sink. Sarah moved through the house quietly, almost like a guest, her footsteps tentative, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried to help. She'd cook dinner, offer to run errands, sit with me in the evenings as if nothing had changed. But beneath it all was a tension so thick it colored every interaction. The easy comfort between us was gone. In its place was something brittle, fragile, ready to shatter if either of us pushed too hard. I met with Mr. Hensley again, bringing the forged will and David's note. I explained everything, what I'd found, what Sarah had admitted. He listened carefully, his face grave. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Elaine, this isn't just a family matter anymore. Forging a legal document, especially a will, has serious consequences. I know she's your daughter, but the law will see it differently." My stomach twisted. She was scared. She thought she was helping me. He nodded, his voice gentler. "Intent matters in a courtroom, but it doesn't erase what was done. We need to come forward before someone else discovers it. If you're honest and proactive, there may be leniency." I nodded, numb. "What happens now?" "We'll need to notify the probate court. There will be an investigation. I'll help you through it, Elaine. But be prepared. It could get messy." I left his office feeling small, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on my shoulders. On the drive home, I caught glimpses of families through car windows, people laughing at a bus stop, a couple holding hands as they crossed the street. For a moment, I envied their ordinariness, the way their problems seemed so simple from the outside. At home, I found Sarah sitting on the back porch, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the sky. I sat beside her, not speaking for a long while. The crickets filled the silence. "Mr. Hensley says we have to go to the court," I said finally. "We have to tell them the truth before someone else finds out." She nodded, not looking at me. "I know." I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the realization that some things couldn't be undone, no matter how much you wanted them to be. The next morning, Sarah and I sat together in the lawyer's office while Mr. Hensley made the call. I watched her hands twist in her lap, her knuckles white. When the call ended, she looked at me, her eyes full of pleading. "Will I go to jail, Mom?" I reached for her hand. "I don't know, but I'll be with you, whatever happens." She burst into tears, pressing her face into my shoulder. For a moment, we just clung to each other, mother and daughter, all our anger and sorrow tangled together. Over the next week, things moved quickly. We met with a probate investigator, a woman named Ms. Fields, who spoke in clipped, precise sentences and never smiled. She took our statements, examined the forged will, compared signatures. Sarah answered every question honestly, her voice shaky but clear. I watched her, proud of her courage, even as my heart broke for the fear she couldn't hide. Word got around, as it always does. Friends stopped calling. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid us. At the grocery store, I caught two women whispering near the produce, their eyes flickering toward me. I held my head high, pretending not to notice, but inside, shame burned hot and raw. One afternoon, Carol stopped by with a casserole. She hugged me at the door, holding on a little longer than usual. "You're doing the right thing, Elle," she said softly. "This will pass. You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe that somehow we would come out the other side of this nightmare. A week later, we stood before the probate judge. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the wood-paneled walls closing in around us. Sarah sat beside me, hands trembling in her lap. Mr. Hensley spoke first, laying out the facts: David's death, the forged will, Sarah's confession. Ms. Fields confirmed the signature was not a match. The judge listened in silence, her eyes steady, unreadable. When Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, she took responsibility for what she'd done. She didn't try to excuse herself. She didn't blame me. She just apologized. To the court, to me, to David's memory. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "This was a serious offense, but your honesty in coming forward, your remorse, and your mother's support all count in your favor. I am referring this for review, but I will recommend counseling and probation rather than jail time." Relief flooded me so suddenly I nearly sobbed. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had finally slipped from her back. We left the courthouse into the crisp autumn air. For the first time in weeks, I felt I could breathe again. But the road ahead was still uncertain. The estate would have to be settled properly, the accounts reviewed, every detail checked and rechecked. I spent hours on the phone with bankers, insurance agents, and the court clerk. Every call, every form, every reminder of David's absence was a fresh wound. Some nights, I'd find Sarah crying in her room. Other nights, I'd hear her laughing softly on the phone with Carol, the sound bittersweet. We talked more, really talked, not just about money or lawyers, but about David. We shared memories, told stories, laughed and cried together. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the daughter I thought I'd lost. She started cooking again, experimenting with David's old recipes. One evening, she brought out his battered grilling apron and insisted we make his favorite burgers together. We burned half of them, but it didn't matter. For a moment, we were just ourselves, messy, imperfect, trying. One afternoon, I found an old photo album wedged behind the couch. I flipped through the pages, smiling at the pictures. David with his wild hair and crooked smile, Sarah in pigtails, me holding them both, laughing at something I can't remember now. Sarah joined me on the couch, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I miss him, Mom," she whispered. "I do too," I said, my voice soft. "Every single day." We sat like that for a long time, flipping through memories, letting ourselves grieve not just for David, but for everything we'd lost and everything we still had. The investigation closed quietly. The judge's recommendation was accepted. Sarah would get counseling and probation, but no jail. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the guilt that lingered. I saw it in Sarah's eyes. The way she apologized for small things. The way she hesitated before asking for anything. One morning, I found her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the yard. She turned to me, her face earnest. "I want to make things right, Mom. I want to earn back your trust." I walked over and hugged her, holding her tight. "We'll get there," I said. "Together." The months that followed were slow, sometimes painful, but always moving forward. We learned to navigate the spaces between us, to be honest, even when it hurt. There were setbacks, moments when the old anger flared, when trust felt out of reach. But there were moments of grace too, a shared joke, a kind word, a quiet evening spent side by side. Through it all, I learned something I hadn't expected. I learned that love isn't just soft and warm. Sometimes it's sharp. It's hard. It's the willingness to face the truth, to fight for what matters, even when your heart is breaking. I thought I'd lost everything when David died. But in the wreckage, I found something else, a different kind of strength, a fiercer kind of love. And in the end, that was enough to keep going. The days slipped by, and the house began to feel less like a crime scene and more like a home again, though a changed one. There were still reminders everywhere. David's favorite mug on the shelf, the faded blue sweater he'd leave draped over the back of the recliner, the books in the living room with his notes in the margins. But the air was lighter now, the oppressive weight of secrets slowly lifting with each new sunrise. Sarah kept her word. She started seeing a counselor twice a week, sometimes coming home puffy-eyed and silent, other times eager to share some small insight she'd had. She took over yard work, raked leaves until her arms ached, planted daffodil bulbs for the spring. I noticed the neighbors watching her sometimes, unsure whether to wave or turn away. The first time Mrs. Lindstrom from next door brought over a plate of cookies, Sarah looked at me in shock, as if she'd been handed a priceless gift. She thanked her twice, voice trembling, and I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. I busied myself with paperwork, insurance claims, utility bills, documents for the court. It was exhausting, but it gave my days structure. Sometimes, when I found myself staring at the pile of forms, I'd remember how David used to hum while sorting the mail, how he'd make silly jokes about our mountain of responsibility. I tried to channel that energy, but more often than not, I just missed him. The real test came one afternoon, about a month after the court hearing. I received a call from the bank, the same sharp-voiced woman who had spoken to me before. "Mrs. Porter, I wanted to inform you that a request was made to transfer the remaining funds in your late husband's personal account. The request was flagged for review, given the recent, unusual activity." My heart dropped. "Who made the request?" She hesitated. "It was submitted online, but the IP address does not match your home. We thought you should know." I thanked her, my hands trembling as I hung up. I stared at the phone, a cold knot forming in my gut. For a wild moment, I wondered if Sarah had relapsed, if she'd gone behind my back again. But when I found her in the yard, kneeling in the flower beds, I saw immediately that something was different. Her face was peaceful, her movements steady. I didn't want to believe the worst, but I couldn't ignore the possibility. That evening, as we ate dinner, I decided to bring it up. "Sarah, the bank called today. Someone tried to access Dad's personal account. Was it you?" She looked up, startled, then shook her head. "No, Mom. I haven't touched anything since we went to court. I promise." I studied her face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. I saw only fear and hurt. "I believe you," I said quietly. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. "Who else would try?" That was the question gnawing at me. David hadn't been a secretive man, but I'd learned recently how little I truly knew about the details of his work and finances. He'd handled all the investments, paid the bills, dealt with the bank. I'd trusted him with everything, and now that trust left me vulnerable. That night, I rummaged through the safe again, searching for anything I might have missed. Old checkbooks, receipts, and, tucked at the very bottom, a business card, creased and faded. The name was unfamiliar. Ronald Tyler, financial consultant. On the back, in David's handwriting, were the words, "Call if trouble." I stared at the card, heartbeat pounding. I had no idea who Ronald Tyler was, but if David had trusted him enough to leave his name behind, I needed to find out why. The next morning, I dialed the number. It rang several times before a man answered, his voice deep and cautious. I explained who I was, that David had passed, that I'd found his card. There was a pause. Then he said, "I wondered if I'd hear from you. David mentioned you might call one day." My heart skipped. Did he say why? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He was concerned about some investments he'd made. He worried someone might come after his accounts. He asked me to keep an eye on things, just in case. A cold chill ran down my back. "Did you know about the will?" "I knew he was revising it. He wanted to make sure you and your daughter would be protected. He was worried about fraud. He'd seen it happen to colleagues. He didn't trust online banking." I told him about the forged will, about Sarah's confession, about the recent attempt to access the account. He listened intently, then sighed. "There are ways people try to exploit grieving families. I can help you lock down the accounts, make sure no one else can get in. And if you want, I can review the paperwork, see if anything looks off." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of security. I thanked him, and we made an appointment to meet the next day. Sarah was anxious about meeting him, but she came with me. Ronald Tyler turned out to be a kind-faced man in his 50s, with gentle eyes and a calm, reassuring manner. He explained everything in plain language, walked us through the accounts, pointed out small discrepancies, tiny withdrawals, odd transfers, little things I'd never have noticed. "None of these were large enough to trigger an alert," he said. "But together, they're suspicious. I'd guess someone's been testing the waters, seeing what they can get away with." Sarah shivered. "Who would do that?" He shrugged. "Could be a scammer. Could be someone who knew David. Did he ever mention anyone he didn't trust?" I thought about it, but nothing came to mind. David had always seemed so steady, so unflappable. But Ronald's questions made me realize how much happened outside my view, how easily someone could slip through the cracks. We spent the next few days gathering records, changing passwords, putting every account on high alert. Ronald advised me to monitor our credit, suggested closing any dormant accounts. Sarah helped with the calls, her voice growing steadier with each one. During that time, something shifted between us. There was still pain, still guilt, but we became partners again. We shared information, made decisions together, leaned on each other when the anxiety felt too heavy. At night, we'd sit in the living room, watching old movies, trading stories about David, good memories and bad, letting ourselves laugh without feeling guilty. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in blocky font. "You think you've locked everything down, but you can't hide what he owed." I stared at the words, fear prickling along my spine. I showed it to Ronald, who frowned. "It could be an empty threat, or it could mean someone wants to scare you into making a mistake." Sarah read it, her lips tightening. "Maybe it's connected to those transfers." We reported the letter to the police, but they couldn't do much. No fingerprints, no way to trace where it came from. I tried not to let it rattle me, but every time the phone rang or a car slowed outside the house, my heart raced. Still, we pressed on. Ronald helped us file a fraud alert. Sarah stayed close, rarely leaving the house unless she was with me. The fear was real, but it no longer paralyzed us. If anything, it drew us together. One evening, as we were sorting through an old box of David's files, Sarah found a sealed envelope marked, "Private, for Elaine only." I hesitated, hands shaking as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated nearly a year before David died. Elaine, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. There are things I never told you, about my work, about some debts I took on to protect us. I thought I could handle it, but if this has reached you, you need to be careful. Trust Ronald. Don't pay anyone who contacts you. Keep Sarah close. I love you. David. I sat down hard, the letter trembling in my hands. Sarah was beside me instantly, her hand covering mine. We'll get through this, Mom. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time, I believed her. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after a storm, when you know the worst has already happened and you're still standing. I looked at my daughter, older than I wanted her to be, but wiser too, and felt a surge of hope. We had more questions now than ever, but we were finally asking them together. For the first time since David's death, I felt something close to gratitude, not for what we'd lost, but for what we still had, each other, and a future that, while uncertain, was ours to shape. The discovery of David's second letter left my mind spinning. I read and reread his words, trying to stitch together the pieces he'd left behind. What debts? What danger had he faced that was big enough to warn me about, yet secret enough to hide all those years? Sarah watched me as I sat there, lost in thought, and for once she didn't rush in with apologies or explanations. She just sat quietly, her presence a steadying force. The next morning, Ronald called to say he'd found something. His tone was careful, but underneath I could sense urgency. I asked Sarah to come with me. I wasn't sure I trusted myself to hear whatever news he had on my own. Ronald greeted us at his office, spread out a stack of papers on the polished table, and motioned for us to sit. I went through David's accounts line by line. He said, "It looks like he took out a private loan, a significant one, almost 18 months ago. Not through any traditional bank. The lender's name is familiar to me. Let's just say, they're not the sort of people you want to owe money to." My stomach dropped. "How much?" He slid the figure toward me. I stared at the number, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. It was more than I'd imagined, more than David ever would have gambled on our future. The interest alone was staggering. "Why would he do that?" Sarah whispered, voice trembling. Ronald shook his head. "My guess? He was trying to cover something up or protect you both from something bigger. But the problem is, if the debt's still outstanding, they might come after you." I felt the room tilt, the air suddenly thin. "Is that who sent the letter?" He nodded grimly. "Very likely. These people rely on intimidation. They don't care about the law. They care about getting paid." Sarah reached for my hand under the table. I clung to her, grateful for the small anchor. "What do we do?" I managed. Ronald leaned in, lowering his voice. "First, don't contact them, don't pay them. Let me handle the communication. And you need to alert the police again, just in case. But Elaine, you need to prepare yourself. This could get messier before it gets better." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, calling the police, making statements, forwarding the threatening letter. Sarah stayed close, her usual restlessness replaced with a quiet determination. That night, we curled up on the couch, not speaking much, just holding on to each other. But as darkness pressed against the windows, fear crept in. Every sound outside made me flinch. I barely slept. When morning came, I forced myself up, made coffee, and watched Sarah move through the kitchen, her movements careful, deliberate. I realized then how much this ordeal had aged her, how it had forced both of us to confront things we weren't ready for. Days went by. We waited. Nothing happened, and yet the tension never left. I tried to keep up with normal life, grocery shopping, laundry, paying the bills. But everything felt tinged with threat, like I was living in a house of cards. A week later, a new letter arrived. This one was handwritten, the scrawl aggressive. Pay up or else. No more warnings. I pressed it flat on the table, willing my hands not to shake. Sarah read over my shoulder, her face going pale. Mom, what if they come here? I wanted to tell her it would be all right, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I called Ronald. He told me to keep everything documented, to stay vigilant, and to call him if anything changed. That night, I double-checked every lock in the house. I left lights on in every room. Sarah hovered nearby, unable to settle. Around midnight, there was a sudden banging on the front door, a heavy, insistent pounding that rattled the glass. My heart stopped. I grabbed my phone with one hand and reached for Sarah with the other. She looked at me, terrified. I dialed the police and whispered, "Someone's outside. Please come quickly." The pounding stopped. Silence settled. I held my breath, listening. Footsteps retreated down the front path, fading into the night. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No one in sight, no note left behind, just muddy boot prints on the porch. The officers were kind, but there was little they could do. "Stay alert," one said, "and don't answer the door unless you know who it is." After they left, Sarah and I sat together in the living room, both of us shaking. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "If I hadn't—" I stopped her. "This isn't your fault. Whatever David was facing, he kept it from both of us. We're in this together now." Sarah nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I called Carol the next morning. I needed her steadiness, her no-nonsense calm. She came right away, bringing food and a hug that lasted longer than usual. "This is too much for you to handle alone," she said. "I'm staying, whether you like it or not." For the first time in weeks, I felt a bit of relief. With Carol there, the house seemed safer, less vulnerable. She insisted on practical steps: cameras at the doors, new locks, a neighborhood watch alert. Sarah rolled her eyes, but I could see how much comfort she took from her aunt's presence. The three of us moved through the days together, a little tribe. I found myself laughing at Carol's jokes, Sarah joining in, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. We took turns cooking, played board games at night, told stories about David, some we'd never shared before. There was a sweetness in those moments, a sense of reclaiming our home from fear. But underneath it all, the threat remained. Ronald kept in touch, updating us on his progress with the lenders. He was cautious, never promising too much. "These people can be patient," he said. "They'll wait for a moment of weakness. Just don't give them one." I tried to heed his advice, but exhaustion wore at me. Some nights, I'd lie awake, listening to the wind, thinking about all the things David had hidden, wondering what else might still come to light. One afternoon, I found Sarah in the garage, rummaging through old boxes. She was holding a small, battered notebook, one I recognized from David's workbench. She opened it, flipping through pages filled with calculations, phone numbers, half-finished lists. "Look," she said, pointing to a page. There, in David's messy handwriting, was a name I'd seen before, Tyler, and beneath it, a list of payments, dates, and a single line: "Final payment due, don't miss." Sarah's eyes met mine. "He was scared, wasn't he?" I nodded, the truth settling between us. We took the notebook to Ronald, who pored over it for hours. He found more than we had: hidden patterns in the numbers, coded references to meetings, small notes about keeping them at bay. He pieced together a timeline, showing how David had managed to keep the lenders away for as long as he had, scraping together payments from every spare dollar. "It's clear he was trying to shield you both," Ronald said. "But at some point, he ran out of options." Hearing it laid out so clearly brought a strange kind of closure. David hadn't been reckless. He'd been desperate. He hadn't trusted us with his fears, but he'd fought to keep us safe. Sarah pressed her face into my shoulder, crying softly. I stroked her hair, letting my own tears fall. "We'll get through this," I promised. "We have to." In the weeks that followed, the threats stopped. Ronald managed to negotiate a settlement, less than what was owed, but enough to satisfy the lenders and put an end to the harassment. We paid what we could, with help from Carol and a small life insurance policy David had kept hidden for emergencies. It was humbling, but it brought relief. The silence that followed felt like sunlight after a long storm. I found myself breathing easier, smiling more often. Sarah grew lighter too, her laughter returning, her steps surer. Carol stayed for a while, then left with hugs and promises to visit soon. One evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from gold to violet. "I wish Dad had told us," she said. "Me too," I replied. "But I think he thought he was protecting us." Sarah nodded, her expression soft. "He did what he could. Now, it's our turn." We sat there until the stars came out, quiet but together, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. I never realized how much fear had become a background hum in my life until it finally faded. There were mornings now when I woke without my heart pounding. Afternoons when Sarah and I could talk about everyday things, groceries, movies, the neighbor's new puppy, without circling back to threats or lawyers. The calm felt fragile, as if one strong wind could shatter it, but I clung to it all the same. Sarah made progress in counseling, though there were hard days. Sometimes she'd come home and go straight to her room, eyes red, barely saying a word. Other times, she was almost buoyant, as if she'd glimpsed a way forward. I learned to let her have her moods. Sometimes I'd leave a mug of tea by her door, a silent reminder she wasn't alone. She'd always come out eventually, curl up beside me on the couch, and tell me bits and pieces about what she was working through. We talked openly now, more than we ever had. One night, as rain rattled the windows, Sarah asked if I blamed her for what happened. I took her hand, feeling the old ache in my chest. "You made a terrible mistake, but you're not a terrible person. I know you were scared. I was too. We both were." She leaned her head on my shoulder, letting out a breath I didn't know she'd been holding. "I thought if I could just fix it, you wouldn't have to be afraid." I was already afraid, I admitted. I just didn't let myself see it. There was a quiet understanding between us then. How much we'd both lost. How much we still had to rebuild. Somehow, the house grew warmer. We started letting people back in. Carol for dinner, Mrs. Lindstrom for coffee, even Mr. Hensley once, to help us finally finalize the estate. I could see the cautious curiosity in their eyes, but also relief. People wanted to believe in healing. They wanted proof that families could break and mend. One Saturday, Sarah suggested we clean out David's closet together. I hesitated, not sure I was ready, but she insisted. "We can keep what matters," she said. "Let the rest go." We pulled out boxes of old clothes, ties from another decade, shoes with worn-down heels. Every item told a story. Sarah found a faded baseball cap and slipped it on, grinning through tears. I held a fraying sweater to my chest, breathing in the ghost of David's scent. We laughed at the things he couldn't bear to throw away, cried over the things that felt too precious to lose. When we finished, there were 3 piles: keep, donate, and a small stack for the trash. It felt like an exhale, a slow letting go. I realized then that grief didn't have to be a locked room. It could be something you moved through, room by room, letting in fresh air as you went. As spring crept in, small signs of renewal showed up everywhere. The daffodils Sarah had planted began to bloom, bright yellow against the brown earth. Neighbors waved as we worked in the yard. Someone left a bouquet on our porch with a card that simply read, "Thinking of you both." One afternoon, while sorting through old files, I found a sealed envelope addressed to Sarah in David's handwriting. I called her in, heart thudding. She sat beside me and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in David's rambling, affectionate style. He told her how proud he was, how much he believed in her, and how, even when he couldn't be there, he trusted her to find her way. He ended with a line that broke us both. Remember, the world is kinder than you think. Trust it, and yourself. Sarah wept, clutching the letter to her chest. I wrapped my arms around her, tears streaming down my own cheeks. I wish I'd read this sooner, she whispered. Maybe you weren't ready, I said. Maybe none of us were. Afterward, she asked if we could visit David's grave together. I hadn't been since the day of the funeral. The thought filled me with dread, but I agreed. We brought fresh flowers and stood in silence for a long time. Finally, Sarah knelt down and placed the letter on the grave, anchoring it with a stone. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice steady. I felt something shift inside me, a loosening, a softening. I spoke quietly, telling David about the daffodils, about the neighbors, about how Sarah was healing, how we were finding our way. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was close. As we walked back to the car, Sarah reached for my hand. "I don't know what's next, but I want to be someone Dad would be proud of. I want to make better choices." I squeezed her hand, pride swelling in my chest. He'd be proud already. So am I. That evening, I sat on the porch alone, watching the sky fade to indigo. The weight on my heart was lighter, but there was a new ache too, a longing for the life we'd lost, tempered by gratitude for what we still had. Over the next weeks, Sarah started talking about the future for the first time. She mentioned going back to school, maybe studying social work or counseling. "I want to help other families," she said. "People who get lost, like we did." I encouraged her, though I knew there would be hurdles. The legal trouble still hung over her, but with each step forward, it seemed less like a sentence and more like a chapter that was finally closing. Carol remained a steady presence. She invited us for Sunday dinners, sent us texts every morning, always ending with, "I love you, don't forget." We leaned on her more than ever, but it no longer felt like weakness. It felt like family. One morning, I woke to find Sarah already up, making pancakes and humming to herself. I watched her from the doorway, marveling at the resilience I'd almost missed in her. She looked up and smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Mom?" I nodded, voice thick. "Yes, sweetheart, we really are." Spring deepened into summer. We painted the living room, trimmed the hedges, even planned a small trip to the beach. Simple things, but each felt like a victory. I knew there would still be difficult days. I knew grief could return, sudden and sharp, without warning. But I also knew we'd learn to weather it, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by facing it together. I thought about David often, not just with pain, but with gratitude. He'd made mistakes, yes, but he'd loved us fiercely. He'd tried to protect us, even if he hadn't always known how. And now, in the quiet, ordinary moments, I found a kind of peace I never thought possible. A peace born not from forgetting, but from surviving, and loving, and daring to hope again. Summer arrived with a kind of gentleness I hadn't felt in years. The air was thick with honeysuckle and the sound of kids riding bikes down the street, their laughter echoing into the dusk. Sometimes I'd pause at the kitchen window, dish towel in hand, just to watch the ordinary life unfolding outside, a reminder that even when your own world turns upside down, the rest of the world keeps moving. Sarah started volunteering at the community center a few afternoons each week. The first time she told me, I saw the old nervousness flicker in her eyes, as if she expected me to say she wasn't ready. Instead, I told her how proud I was. She left the house in her favorite yellow shirt, hair pulled back, a fresh confidence in her step. She was learning to trust herself again, and I was learning to trust her too. Our routine shifted, slowly but surely, into something that felt sustainable. I found a part-time bookkeeping job at the local florist, which gave me structure and a little extra money. The owner, a woman named June, turned out to be both blunt and kind, with a knack for knowing when I needed a pep talk and when I just needed to arrange tulips in silence. After a few weeks, she let me take home the flowers that were just past their prime. I filled our house with color: sunflowers in the kitchen, daisies on the mantel, peonies on the nightstand. Carol's visits became less about crisis management and more about enjoying each other. She brought over new recipes to try, sometimes bringing her own laughter, sometimes just an open ear. We all sat on the porch in the warm evenings, watching the sun slide behind the maples, talking about nothing and everything. It was healing in a way I never expected, just the presence of family, no longer strained by secrets. The legal troubles didn't vanish, but they receded into the background. Sarah kept up with her probation requirements and counseling, and the judge's final letter arrived one morning in July. Probation complete. Case closed. I read it twice, then called her at the center. She let out a whoop so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. That night, we celebrated with takeout and a homemade cake, laughing until we cried. Still, there were reminders of how easily things could have gone another way. One evening, Sarah came home pale, shaking. She told me a man had come to the center, asking questions about David, about his work, about us. He didn't give his name, just handed her a business card and left. I took the card. It was plain, just a phone number and the name J. Sloan, private investigator. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I called Ronald, who said he'd look into it. Sometimes these types sniff around after a closed estate, hoping for a payout. Don't worry unless he comes back. I tried not to let the worry take root, but it sat in the back of my mind like a stone. Sarah was rattled, but determined not to run. I'm not hiding, Mom. I won't let some stranger scare me away from my life. I hugged her tightly, pride warring with my old, familiar fear. A few days later, I found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. My hands shook as I opened it, half expecting another threat. But inside was a short, apologetic note from Sloan himself. He wrote that he'd been hired by a distant business associate of David's to confirm the details of the estate. But after his visit, he saw there was nothing amiss. He wished us well and said he wouldn't be bothering us again. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. When Sarah came home, I showed her the letter, and we laughed together, shaky but relieved. That little scare marked the last ripple of uncertainty. Life moved forward. I saw changes in Sarah, how she stood a little taller, how she listened more closely when people spoke, how she forgave herself in small, everyday ways. The girl who had once tried to fix everything alone was learning to ask for help, to accept that broken things could be mended, even if the scars remained. I changed too. I stopped apologizing for the messiness of grief, stopped feeling ashamed for needing support. I learned to ask for company when the nights were too long, to accept help with the things I could no longer handle alone. I even joined a support group for women who'd lost spouses, finding comfort in the stories of others. Some heartbreakingly familiar, others wildly different, but all connected by the same thread of survival. Carol cheered for us every step of the way. She convinced me to take a pottery class, even though my first mug came out lopsided and my bowl had a crack the size of the Mississippi. She dragged Sarah and me to outdoor concerts, to art fairs, to the annual Strawberry Festival. We said yes to things we would have once avoided, learning to live in the world again instead of hiding from it. As the summer deepened, I noticed how the light lingered in the evenings, how the air buzzed with possibility. One night, sitting on the porch, Sarah turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever be completely past this, Mom? Or does it just become part of who we are?" I thought about it for a moment, watching fireflies blink in the yard. I think it becomes a part of us, but not the only part. We get to choose what else we become. She nodded, a soft smile tugging at her lips. I like that. We sat there, side by side, not needing to say more. That August, Sarah applied for classes at the local community college. I helped her fill out the forms, proud and nervous, feeling the circle of our world slowly widening again. The day she got her acceptance letter, she ran into the house, waving it above her head. We danced in the kitchen, dizzy with relief and excitement. I hung her letter on the fridge, right next to a photo of David in his old fishing hat, grinning at the camera. I liked to think he'd be proud, not because everything had gone right, but because, despite everything, we'd found a way through. The world was still imperfect, still full of sharp edges and shadows. But there was also music, and laughter, and second chances. Sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, that was everything. By the time September rolled around, the air had turned crisp, and the leaves began their slow, spectacular change. I felt it in my bones, a sense of turning, a season closing, and something gentler, more forgiving, beginning. There were mornings when I'd stand on the porch with my coffee, breathing in the scent of earth and wood smoke, and I'd think about how different my life looked from just a year before. The ache of missing David was still there, sharp and sudden sometimes, but it was softer around the edges, wrapped in gratitude instead of fear. Sarah's first day of classes arrived on a bright, cloudless morning. She was nervous, jittery, checking her bag for notebooks and pens, smoothing her hair 3 times before we walked out the door. I drove her to campus, the radio humming quietly, both of us pretending we weren't about to cry. When we pulled into the parking lot, she turned to me, eyes shining. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, even when I almost gave up on myself." I smiled, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I couldn't give up on you, Sarah, no matter what." She hugged me tightly before stepping out into her new life, shoulders straight, chin lifted. I watched her walk away, sunlight glinting off her hair, and for a moment, I saw her as she was at 5 years old, determined, hopeful, ready for anything. I sat in the car for a long time after, letting the tears come, feeling every bit of pride and sorrow and hope all tangled together. The house felt different with Sarah gone during the day. I kept busy at the flower shop, the scent of lilies and eucalyptus soaking into my skin. I took long walks in the evenings, sometimes with Carol, sometimes alone, letting my mind wander without fear. Sometimes I'd find myself at the old park bench, where David and I used to sit and talk about nothing and everything. I'd watch the ducks gliding across the water, the leaves drifting down, and I'd speak to him quietly, telling him about Sarah's classes, about Carol's new boyfriend, about how we were managing, how we were healing. One evening, Carol and I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. She sipped her wine and nudged me gently. "You know, Elle, I think you're stronger than you realize. You kept your family together when everything tried to tear you apart." I smiled, thinking of all the times I'd felt like I was failing, all the nights I'd lain awake, terrified of what would come next. "I don't know if I kept us together," I said softly. "But I learned not to hide from what hurt. Maybe that's enough." She grinned. "It's more than enough. It's everything." Sarah began to blossom at school, her old spark returning. She made friends, joined a study group, even started volunteering with a crisis hotline. Some evenings, she'd come home and talk for hours, her stories tumbling out, stories about people who reminded her of us, about the messiness and resilience of other families. I could see her growing into someone new, someone shaped by pain, but not defined by it. One night, she came into my room after midnight, crawling onto the bed the way she used to as a child. "I was so angry at Dad for leaving us with all that mess," she whispered. "But I think I understand now. He didn't mean for any of it to happen. He was just scared. He tried to protect us, even if he made mistakes." I stroked her hair, tears in my eyes. "We all make mistakes, honey. We just have to keep loving each other through them." She fell asleep beside me, and for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully, comforted by the soft rise and fall of her breath. Autumn deepened, and with it, a sense of peace I'd thought I'd never find. The threats and secrets that had haunted us became just stories, chapters we'd survived, lessons etched into the grain of our days. I saw it in the way Sarah laughed now, freely and without apology. In the way I could look at David's picture and feel more love than regret. We marked David's birthday with a picnic at the park. Just Sarah, Carol, and me. We brought his favorite foods, told our best stories, and let ourselves cry and laugh in equal measure. As the sun set, I realized I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. Life was uncertain, always had been, but I'd learned I could trust it again. I could trust myself. The flower shop kept me busy through the holidays. I found joy in the small rituals, arranging winter greenery, tying bows, greeting customers with a smile that felt real. Carol's new boyfriend, Sam, joined our family dinners, filling the house with laughter and easy conversation. I watched Sarah and Carol tease each other, saw the ease in Sarah's eyes, and felt something inside me settle. On New Year's Eve, we stood together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching fireworks bloom over the rooftops. Sarah leaned into my side, her voice quiet. "We made it, Mom. We really did." I looked at her, at the woman she was becoming, at the family we'd pieced back together out of love and stubborn hope. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with feeling. "We made it." I thought of all the ways I'd been tested, by loss, by betrayal, by fear. I thought of David, of how hard he'd tried, of how fiercely he'd loved us. I thought of the woman I'd become, the woman who learned to let go, to forgive, to trust again. And I realized that the story of our family wasn't defined by what we'd lost, but by how we'd chosen to survive, by the courage to face the truth, the humility to ask for help, and the grace to begin again. As the sky filled with light and the world turned quietly toward another year, I felt the fullness of my life settle around me, imperfect, unexpected, and utterly precious. Whatever came next, I knew we would meet it together, stronger, wiser, and above all, unbroken. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments.